Trump just made a move that matches Daniel 9. Here is why it matters. Did Trump just approve a deal that was prophesied by the Bible? Has America fulfilled the prophecy of Daniel 9? You will be shocked when you find 4 facts about Donald Trump's move. Number 1. Trump's new move. On January 22, 2026, during a ceremony on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, President Trump formally ratified the founding charter of the Board of Peace. This wasn't just an announcement. This wasn't a pledge or a handshake or a photo opportunity. And here's where most people stopped paying attention, because they heard peace plan and assumed it was just another diplomatic moment. But this was not a press conference. This was an institutional birth. The Board of Peace, or BOP as it's being called, is a multinational body originally designed to oversee the post-war reconstruction and governance of Gaza. It stems from Trump's 20-point comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, which was announced back in September of 2025 and achieved a ceasefire, hostage releases, and the beginning of humanitarian aid. The United Nations Security Council even passed Resolution 2803 in November of 2025, formally welcoming the framework and giving it international legitimacy. But here's the part that most people didn't catch. And this is critical. The Board of Peace doesn't just cover Gaza. Its charter gives it authority to expand into other global conflicts. Trump himself has stated ambitions to address situations in Ukraine, Venezuela, and beyond. He's called it, and I'm quoting him directly here, the most consequential international organization in history. Over 20 nations signed on as founding members. Israel is at the table. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, Pakistan, Morocco, Argentina, Hungary. The list goes on. Some estimates put the number closer to 35. Permanent seats on the board reportedly require a $1 billion funding commitment within the first year. As of mid-February 2026, total pledges exceed $5 billion. Thousands of military personnel have been committed to a UN-authorized international stabilization force for security and demilitarization in Gaza alone. Now, remember that number. Over 20 nations. Because when we get to Daniel 9:27, there's a specific word in that verse. Many. And the way it's used is going to make your stomach drop when you compare it to what I just described. But here's what's even more striking, and this connects directly to something we'll uncover when we reach the Ezekiel 38 connection later in this video. The demilitarization provisions in this charter are quietly creating the exact military condition that the prophet Ezekiel said would exist before a massive invasion of Israel. You're not ready for that yet, but you will be. Now, hold that image in your mind, because we're about to open the book of Daniel. And when you see what the prophet wrote 26 centuries ago, you are going to understand why people cannot stop talking about what just happened in that room. But before we get to Daniel, I need you to understand something that most commentary is completely missing about this moment. Everyone is focused on the headline. Trump signs peace deal. But the headline is not the story. The structure is the story. Because this isn't a temporary ceasefire agreement. This isn't a one-time diplomatic summit where leaders shake hands and go home. This is a permanent institution with a charter, with executive leadership, with an operational board, with billion-dollar funding requirements, and with the legal framework to expand its authority beyond Gaza into any conflict zone on Earth. Think about what that means. This isn't a handshake, it's infrastructure. The Gaza Executive Board alone includes U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, and the President of the World Bank. Below that sits a Palestinian-led technocratic body called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, headed by Ali Shaath, which is designed to replace Hamas governance entirely. There are plans for a $30 billion development program to rebuild Gaza from the ground up. Housing, schools, industrial centers, even coastal tourism zones. There are provisions for full and immediate demilitarization of Hamas. There is a UN-authorized international military force on the ground. And all of it, every layer of it, reports upward to one chairman with indefinite authority and no term limits. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. And I don't want you to answer it yet. I want you to hold it. Has anything like this ever existed before in modern history? A single leader, outside of elected government, chairing a multinational peace institution with expanding global authority? Hold that question, because the answer is about to become very important. But here's what's truly chilling, and this is where everything shifts. Because the prophet Daniel used a very specific word to describe how this kind of agreement would come into existence. And that's just the beginning. Because behind that single word sits a mathematical framework so precise that it predicted the exact arrival of the Messiah. And that same framework has one final piece that hasn't been triggered yet. Until now? Maybe. Let's find out. Now, let's open our Bibles. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Now, there's a lot packed into this verse, and we're going to unpack all of it. But right now, I want you to focus on 6 words. He shall confirm the covenant with many. He, one person, shall confirm, not create, not invent, not propose. Confirm the covenant, a specific agreement, with many, not with one, not with two, with many. And this is where the Hebrew language opens up something that most English readers miss entirely. The word translated as confirm in the original Hebrew carries the meaning of to strengthen, to make firm, to enforce, to establish something that may have already been discussed or proposed. It doesn't necessarily mean to create from scratch. It means to take something that exists in some form and make it official, make it binding, make it real. Daniel didn't say create. He said confirm. And that distinction, that single word, is about to become the most important detail in this entire video. Because when we get to the 70 weeks framework, you'll see that this word isn't just describing an action. It's describing a trigger. The trigger that restarts a prophetic clock that has been paused for over 2,000 years. But we're not there yet. First, I need you to see something. Now, I need to be very clear here, and I'm going to come back to this point multiple times throughout this video. I am not telling you that this is the fulfillment of Daniel 9:27. What I am telling you is that the language matches, the structure matches, the mechanism matches. And if you're a student of Bible prophecy, you cannot afford to look away from something that aligns this closely with what the prophet described. But this isn't even the part that should make you sit up straight. Because what comes next in Daniel's prophecy is what has people genuinely unsettled. And it has everything to do with what the word weak actually means. The Bible doesn't warn us about war as the precursor to judgment. It warns us about peace. And when you see how that warning connects to Ezekiel's invasion prophecy, and how the Board of Peace is quietly building the exact conditions Ezekiel described, you are going to understand why so many watchmen are losing sleep right now. Now, let's be honest, because if we're going to be serious students of Scripture, we can't just point at the things that match and ignore the things that don't. That's not how prophecy works. That's not how God works. And that's not how I'm going to present this to you. So let me walk you through both sides, what aligns and what doesn't. Here's what aligns. The Board of Peace involves many nations, not 2, not 5. Over 20 founding members, with more joining. Daniel said, with many. That's a direct structural parallel. It involves Israel. Israel is at the table. Representatives like Gideon Sayar have been directly involved. Daniel's prophecy is specifically about the Jewish people and the land of Israel. That's not a loose connection. That's a geographic and covenantal match. It involves regional peace and security. The entire framework is built around ending conflict, enforcing stability, and creating long-term governance structures in the Middle East. That's the exact category of agreement Daniel is describing. And here's what's haunting about this. Because when we get to what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians about peace and safety, you're going to see that this kind of stability isn't just a diplomatic achievement. In Scripture, it's a setup. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And it was personally confirmed by a central leader. Not a committee, not a vote. One man signed the charter. One man chairs the board. One man holds veto authority. Daniel said, he shall confirm. Not they, he. Now, here's what does not match. And this matters just as much. There is no explicit 7-year term in the Board of Peace Charter. The initial Gaza mandate is set for 2 years with possible extensions, but there is no binding 7-year covenant structure visible at this time. There is no rebuilt temple. Daniel 9:27 describes the cessation of sacrifice and offering, which requires a functioning temple in Jerusalem. That does not exist right now. There is no abomination of desolation event. There is no midpoint betrayal. There is no desecration of holy ground. So what are we looking at? Here's how I'd frame it, and I want you to write this down, because this is the lens through which we should be viewing everything that's happening right now. This is not fulfillment, but it is formation. The pieces are not all in place, but the architecture is being built. The mechanisms are being tested. The vocabulary is being normalized. And the pattern that Daniel described, is emerging in real time. And that should have every believer paying very close attention to what happens next. But here's what most people don't realize, and this is going to change the way you read everything I've just said. Because Daniel 9:27 doesn't stand alone. It's the final verse in one of the most mathematically precise prophecies ever recorded. A prophecy that predicted the exact year of the Messiah's arrival, and has one remaining piece that hasn't activated yet. And when you understand what activates it, you'll see why what happened in Davos isn't just interesting. It's potentially historic in a way that goes far beyond politics. Now, if you really want to understand why this matters, you need to understand the bigger picture of Daniel chapter 9. Because verse 27 doesn't exist in isolation. It's the final piece of one of the most precise and mathematically stunning prophecies in the entire Bible. It's called the prophecy of the 70 weeks. And when you see how it works, you'll understand why that final week, the one that hasn't happened yet, is the most watched countdown in all of Scripture. Here's the framework. In Daniel chapter 9, the angel Gabriel appears to Daniel and reveals that 70 weeks have been decreed for the Jewish people. Now, the Hebrew word for weeks here is shabuim, and it literally means sevens. Not 7 days, 7-year periods. So 70 weeks equals 490 years. Gabriel breaks those 490 years into 3 sections. 7 weeks. That's 49 years, covering the rebuilding of Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile. Then 62 weeks, 434 years, leading up to the arrival of the Messiah, the Anointed One, Jesus Christ. And scholars have calculated that timeline from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem under Artaxerxes in 445 BC to the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. The exact number of years matches. To the day, according to some calculations, 69 weeks fulfilled with mathematical precision. But then, something happens. After the 69th week, the Messiah is cut off. That's the crucifixion. And then, instead of the 70th week beginning immediately, there's a gap, a pause, an unexplained silence in the prophetic timeline. That gap is what we're living in right now. It's called the Church Age, the period between the crucifixion of Christ and the beginning of the final 7 years described in Daniel's prophecy. 69 weeks have been completed. 1 remains. And according to Daniel 9:27, that final week, that final 7-year period, begins with a very specific event, a covenant, confirmed with many, by one central figure. That's what starts the clock. And here's what makes this connection so difficult to dismiss. Because when we lay the prophetic timeline we just described over the events of the last 80 years, something emerges that I don't think any previous generation has ever witnessed. The convergence of conditions, Israel restored, Jerusalem recaptured, multinational peace frameworks forming, is accelerating. And that acceleration connects to a warning from the Apostle Paul that is going to reframe everything you think you know about peace in the Middle East. And I need you to understand something. This clock does not restart casually. It doesn't tick because of a news headline. It doesn't activate because of a political agreement that looks impressive. The final week of Daniel begins when God's prophetic conditions are fully met, not when human speculation says they are. But here's what should keep you watching. Every generation that saw these conditions forming had reason to pay attention. And no generation in history has seen conditions form as rapidly, as specifically, and as structurally as the one we are living in right now. And what I'm about to show you next is going to prove that statement. Because when you see the timeline of the last 80 years laid side by side with Daniel's framework, you're going to realize that the prophetic dominoes aren't just falling. They're falling in the exact sequence the Bible described. And the last domino? It might be sitting on a table in Davos. Scene 6. Why timing makes Christians nervous. And this is where the timeline starts to feel heavy. Because Daniel's prophecy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a larger prophetic framework that Jesus himself pointed to. And when you lay that framework over the events of the last 80 years, the convergence is unlike anything the church has ever seen. Israel is restored as a nation. After nearly 2,000 years of exile and dispersion, the Jewish people return to their homeland. The prophetic clock, the one that requires Israel to exist as a nation for end times events to unfold, starts ticking. Jerusalem comes under Jewish control for the first time since the Roman destruction in 70 AD. Jesus said in Luke 21:24, Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That trampling ended in 1967. And here's what most prophecy teachers won't say out loud. But this is going to become devastatingly clear when we reach the 1 Thessalonians connection in the next section. Every single one of these milestones moved the world closer not to war, but to peace. And in the biblical model, that's not the good news people think it is. And now, 2025, 2026. Multinational peace frameworks centered on Israel are not just being proposed, they're being institutionalized. Regional alliances are shifting at a pace no one predicted. Arab nations that refuse to acknowledge Israel's existence are now sitting at the same table, pledging billions and signing charters together. The conditions that Daniel described, a covenant with many involving Israel, are no longer theoretical. They're operational. And here's what I need you to hear, because this is the part that most people miss. Prophecy doesn't unfold randomly. It unfolds when the conditions exist. The flood didn't come until the ark was built. The Messiah didn't arrive until the Roman roads were laid and the common language was spread. And the final week of Daniel will not begin until the geopolitical, spiritual, and covenantal conditions are fully in place. The question isn't whether those conditions will come someday. The question is, how many of them are already here? And here's where this video takes a turn that I don't think you're expecting. Because everything I've shown you so far, the charter, the structure, Daniel's language, the prophetic timeline, all of that deals with what's been built. But what I'm about to show you deals with something far more dangerous. Now here's where we need to shift gears, because there's a layer to this that goes beyond politics and timelines. There's a spiritual dynamic at work that most people don't see. And it's one of the most sobering warnings in the entire New Testament. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Not during war, not during chaos, not when the world is falling apart. The destruction comes when people finally feel safe, when the treaties are signed, when the leaders are shaking hands, when the headlines say, peace achieved. That's when it hits. And this connects directly to something most prophecy students already know, but rarely think about in this context. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 38. This is the prophecy describing a massive future invasion of Israel. An invasion led by a coalition that most scholars identify as Russia, Iran, Turkey, and North African allies. And what does Ezekiel say the condition of Israel will be when this invasion occurs? Ezekiel 38:8. And they shall dwell safely, all of them. Ezekiel 38:11. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. Do you see what that's saying? Israel is attacked when its defenses are down, when the walls are gone, when the peace agreements have done their job too well. And here's what makes this even more ominous. When the peace agreements have created a false sense of safety, when the military readiness has softened because the treaties say everything is fine. Now think about what the Board of Peace is designed to do. Demilitarize Gaza, establish international peacekeeping forces, normalize economic relations with former adversaries, create a security blanket backed by billions of dollars and dozens of nations. If that succeeds, even partially, what happens to Israel's posture? They relax. They build. They invest. They dwell safely.
Many seem to be confused because they do not understand the book of Revelation. However, what if there was an animation showing the entire book? Well, we created that. And to watch that, click here.